Welcome to the Philosophical Odysseys podcast.
So glad to be here.
We are absolutely thrilled to have you joining us today. Now, for those of you who have been with us before, you know exactly what we do here.
That's right.
Today, we are embarking on a massive, really comprehensive deep dive into a topic that honestly touches every single moment of your waking life.
It really does.
Today's mission is, well, fundamentally about survival.
Yes, psychological survival.
Exactly. Specifically, how you and all of us can survive the modern information landscape without losing our grip on reality, on art, and on our morals.
It's a tall order.
It is. We are basing this deep dive on a truly monumental book called Truth, Beauty, and Goodness Reframed, or in its Turkish translation, Hakikat, Güzellik ve İyilik.
By the renowned educational psychologist Howard Gardner.
Right.
And that is just the perfect way to frame the stakes of what we are about to explore. Because to truly understand what Gardner is doing in this work, we really have to establish the central tension that defines our era.
The big picture.
Exactly. If we look back over the grand sweep of human history, for millennia, humanity has relied on three classical virtues to make sense of the world.
Truth, beauty, and goodness.
Yes, they were the compass points for civilization. They formed the absolute bedrock of how human beings navigated their existence.
Not anymore.
No, today, right now, as you are listening to this, these three virtues are under massive, really unprecedented assault from two unexpected and incredibly powerful forces.
And those are...
The first is the philosophical skepticism of postmodernism, and the second is the chaotic, rapidly changing, and completely overwhelming landscape of digital media.
The contrast there is just fascinating to me. We have these three ancient stabilizing virtues acting as our foundational anchors, and then these two intensely modern forces acting as basically the ultimate catalysts for chaos.
It's a perfect storm.
It really is. So in this deep dive, we are going to break down each of these three virtues for you. We will examine exactly how they're changing, why they absolutely still matter, and most importantly, how you can cultivate them in a world where fake news, AI-generated art, and constantly shifting morals are simply the daily norm.
The water we're swimming in.
Right. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of how to save these virtues, we really need to understand the psychological whiplash of the last century.
Oh, the whiplash is real.
Gardner frames this modern crisis brilliantly by offering us a tale of two very different books, written about a century apart.
It is a really striking comparison. The first author Gardner brings to our attention is Henry Adams.
Writing in 1904.
Right, 1904. Now, Adams was a historian, a brilliant thinker, and a member of one of America's most distinguished political families.
That Adams family, yeah.
Yeah. But by 1904, he was feeling profoundly, almost paralyzingly overwhelmed by early 20th century technology.
Which is so funny to think about now.
I know, but we are talking about the advent of X-rays, the automobile, the early rumblings of radio, mass immigration, and these rapidly growing industrialized cities.
It was a lot all at once.
Adams looked around at this terrifying acceleration of human capability and felt he simply did not have the psychological or philosophical strength to cope with these massive shifts.
Which, honestly, is incredibly relatable when you really think about it. We look back at 1904 as quaint. But for Adams, an X-ray wasn't just a medical tool.
No, not at all.
It was a profound disruption of how humans understood solid matter. The automobile was obliterating traditional concepts of time and distance.
Exactly.
If Adams was pushed to the brink of an existential crisis by early radio waves and cars, imagine him trying to process the cognitive load of a modern smartphone notification screen.
Or a Twitter feed during a global crisis. He would have lost his mind.
Totally. So instead of embracing his modern era, Adams retreated. He wrote a highly nostalgic, almost romantic essay titled Mont Saint-Michel en Chartres, a study of 13th century unity.
He basically turned his back on the 20th century.
Yeah, he longed for the 11th and 12th centuries, the medieval era.
And he chose that specific era and those specific architectural monuments for a very distinct reason.
The cathedrals.
Yes. To Adams, the breathtaking Gothic cathedrals of France represented a perfect, unattainable unity that the modern world had completely lost.
How so?
Well, he looked at a cathedral like Chartres and saw a world that was definitively true, because every stone, every piece of stained glass was ruled entirely by God and a singular religious narrative.
Right.
He saw a world that was definitively beautiful, because the cathedral was a magnificent collective human creation deliberately reflecting the divine image.
Thank goodness.
He saw a world that was definitively good, guided by the clear, unwavering moral light of the church. For Adams, truth, beauty, and goodness were not separate academic disciplines.
Either one thing.
They were completely intertwined into one solid, harmonious structure. You couldn't have one without the other two.
That is such a powerful image. The cathedral as a physical manifestation of absolute certainty. But let me pull the lens back for a second, because the contrast Gardner sets up next is just jarring.
It gives you a whiplash.
We go from Henry Adams in 1904 begging for universal order to our second book, published roughly a century later in 2010.
By David Shields.
Right, the novelist and essayist David Shields. And the book is called Reality Hunger, a manifesto.
A very different kind of book.
Describing Shields' book is a completely different endeavor because it actively defies being a traditional book. It's composed of 618 short passages or aphorisms.
And the kicker
is that almost the entire book consists of unattributed, plagiarized quotes.
It's wild.
For over 200 pages, the reader is consuming words stolen from other authors, remixed and mashed together without any warning, citation, or context.
Until the lawyers got involved.
Yeah, it was only at the very end of the publication process that lawyers forced Shields to include a reluctant appendix detailing where he actually took the quotes from.
And that forced appendix is almost the perfect ironic punctuation to the whole project. Because those stolen quotes aren't just random selection.
No, they have a very specific theme.
They actively, aggressively question if truth even exists, if it can be found, or if it even matters anymore in a modern context.
He has quotes in there like...
Yeah, quotes like, all the best stories are true, side by side with quotes asserting, a thing can be both true and false at the same time.
It's pure chaos.
His book is a pure postmodern pastiche. It takes the rigid, cathedral-like concepts of truth, beauty, and goodness, and completely pulverizes them.
As a reader navigating reality hunger, you are just forced into a state of constant destabilization.
You really are. You have to ask yourself, what is objectively true in this book?
Is it ethically good or moral to publish a book of stolen quotes and call it your own manifesto?
Exactly. Is this kind of copy-paste, fragmented remix actually beautiful?
It perfectly encapsulates the whiplash we were talking about earlier. We have moved from Henry Adams's desperate desire for absolute harmonious certainty to David Shields' fragmented copy-paste reality.
And this shift, as Gardner points out, didn't happen in a vacuum.
Right, it was driven by those twin forces we identified at the start, postmodernism and digital media. Let's look at the mechanics of that.
Sure.
Postmodernism is essentially the philosophical critique that claims truth and beauty aren't these grand universal realities just waiting out there in the ether to be discovered by smart people.
Right. They reject that completely.
Instead, postmodernists argue that these concepts are entirely subjective constructs. They argue that what a society calls true or beautiful merely reflects the biases or the power dynamics of whoever happens to be in charge at the time.
Exactly. The postmodernist looks at Adams's beloved cathedral and doesn't see divine unity.
What do they see?
They see a monument to the immense political and economic power of the medieval church, built on the backs of impoverished peasants. If you declare a classic Renaissance painting beautiful, a strict postmodernist might argue you are simply bowing to an arbitrary cultural narrative dictated by history's winners.
Wealthy European patrons.
Yes. Now, while that critique can be a useful tool for deconstructing historical biases, when applied universally, it breeds this pervasive, cynical relativism.
It's dangerous.
It creates a culture where any claim to objective truth or universal beauty is met with suspicion, leading to a societal shrug where everyone simply says, well, who am I to judge?
And then, riding right alongside that philosophical deconstruction, we have the technological enabler of all this chaos.
Digital media.
Digital media. This is the water we are all swimming in every single day. Think about how digital platforms inherently reinforce that postmodern fragmentation.
It's built into the architecture.
It is. Wikipedia is an absolute marvel of human collaboration, but its fundamental premise is that it can be edited by anyone at any time, instantly altering the truth of a given page.
And photos, too.
Right. A digital photograph, which used to be considered undeniable documentary evidence, can now be doctored so flawlessly with AI that you literally cannot trust your own eyes.
We see blogs and social media accounts claim that a politician was born in another country.
Or that a major historical event was a hoax.
Without a single shred of credible proof, and millions of people will share it as absolute fact. Pirating music, movies, or intellectual property is completely normalized.
The digital realm creates an environment of unchecked, confusing and largely unexamined claims that perfectly mirrors Shield's reality hunger.
It really represents a profound fracturing of the human experience. To illustrate just how unified things used to be before this modern fracture, Gardner points to a fascinating historical baseline.
The ancient Egyptian concept?
Yes, the concept of mat. This is a concept that the brilliant author Margaret Atwood has also written about extensively.
I love her work.
It's fantastic. In ancient Egypt, Ma'at wasn't just a word, it was a deity, but more importantly, it represented truth, justice, balance, the order of nature, and the governing principles of the universe, all wrapped into one single, unbreakable concept.
So it was everything.
It was the absolute standard for right and moral behavior. In the worldview of Ma'at, truth, beauty, and goodness were completely inseparable.
You couldn't pull them apart.
Exactly. To tell a lie was to create ugliness. To act immorally was to disrupt the balance of the universe itself. To violate one virtue was to violate them all.
Wow.
But today, under the crushing weight of postmodern philosophy and digital chaos, that unified concept of Ma'at has been shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces.
So we have to ask you, the listener, to reflect on your own daily experience. Have you ever felt totally paralyzed by the sheer volume of contradictory information flowing across your screens?
It happens to all of us.
Have you ever witnessed something online or even in person and felt hesitant to call out bad behavior because you have so deeply absorbed that cultural whisper of, well, it's all relative, everyone has their own truth, who am I to judge?
The modern paralysis.
If you have ever felt that way, you are absolutely not alone. You're experiencing exactly what Gardner is diagnosing in this deep dive. You are feeling the loss of Ma'at.
But we aren't just going to admire the problem here.
No. The purpose of this deep dive isn't just to complain. We are going to explore the philosophical and practical tools you need to navigate that exact feeling of paralysis.
Precisely. We cannot retreat to the 12th century like Henry Adams wished to, nor can we surrender to the cynical chaos of David Shields.
We have to rebuild.
We have to rebuild. So if postmodernism and the digital realm have shattered that ancient unity, how do we start picking up the pieces?
Where do we begin?
If we're going to rebuild a functional worldview, we have to start with the bedrock, truth. But to even defend truth today, we first have to agree on what it actually looks like in practice, which is notoriously difficult.
People have very different definitions.
Right. Gardner defines truth fundamentally and somewhat narrowly as a property of statements or propositions.
Meaning?
This is crucial. Truth isn't a mystical aura. It is a measure of language. For example, the statement 2 + 2 = 4 has the property of being true.
And 2 + 2 = 5.
Has the property of being false. Statements can be about literally anything. The weather outside, a specific historical event, a complex scientific fact, but truth is simply the measure of whether those specific statements align with observable reality.
I think that narrow definition is incredibly helpful because it strips away the mysticism. And our pursuit of that alignment between statement and reality starts very early at the most basic sensory level.
Yes, very early.
Imagine a toddler pointing to their father across the room and saying, "Dad." The mother nods and says, "That's right, that's Dad."
That is basic foundational sensory truth.
Exactly. The toddler's visual input matches the linguistic output, and it is confirmed by the community. But if the mother points to a picture of herself and says, "That's Dad," the toddler immediately gets confused and protests, "No, not Dad."
Even at 2 years old.
Even at 2 years old, long before we know what philosophy is, we have a fundamental, hardwired grasp of what is true and what is false based on our senses.
But it gets complicated.
Very fast. As we grow, the world gets infinitely more complex, and we quickly realize our senses can be easily tricked.
Optical illusions.
What looks exactly like a puddle of water on a hot highway is just a mirage reflecting the sky. What sounds exactly like a gunshot might just be a car backfiring. Sensory truth is vital, but it is fragile.
And because our sensory truth is so easily fooled by mirages, illusions, and our own cognitive biases, human beings spend centuries developing what Gardner calls disciplinary truth.
Disciplinary truth.
This is where civilization really takes a leap forward. We created rigorous methods and disciplines like mathematics, the scientific method, historical peer review, and journalistic standards to systematically verify statements and separate fact from fiction.
The heavy lifters.
These disciplines are incredible achievements of the human intellect. They give us tools to understand the mechanics of the world that go far, far beyond our fragile senses.
Like telescopes and microscopes.
Exactly. They allow us to know the composition of a star we can't touch, or the exact sequence of events in a war that happened hundreds of years before we were born.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate here, because this is exactly where the postmodernist steps in and throws a wrench in the gears.
They always do.
The postmodernist looks at all those academic disciplines and says, hold on a minute, science and history aren't absolute truths, they're just the current consensus.
Right, the moving goalpost argument.
Yeah, they say, look at the historical record. We used to believe with absolute scientific certainty that the Earth was flat. We used to believe the sun revolved around the Earth.
Even in modern physics.
Yes, even in the realm of highly advanced modern physics, we moved from Isaac Newton's mechanical laws of physics, which were considered absolute truth for centuries, to Albert Einstein's theory of relativity.
A huge paradigm shift.
So the postmodernist argues, if scientific paradigms are always shifting, and if historical narratives are always being rewritten, then objective truth doesn't actually exist. It's all just a temporary illusion agreed upon by the people currently in power.
That is perhaps the most common and seductive postmodern trap out there. But Gardner argues it represents a fundamental misunderstanding of how knowledge works.
How so?
Just because scientific paradigms shift, it absolutely does not mean that truth doesn't exist, or that all claims are equally valid. Let's look closely at the physics example you brought up because it perfectly illustrates the point.
Newton versus Einstein.
Right. When Albert Einstein revolutionized physics with the theory of relativity, he didn't suddenly make Isaac Newton's laws false in our everyday application.
They still work.
Newton's laws still perfectly mathematically explain how a baseball flies through the air, how a bridge supports weight, or how a car brakes on a highway. You can still use Newtonian physics to get a rocket to the moon.
So Einstein didn't destroy Newton?
He didn't destroy Newton. He simply refined our understanding, showing that Newton's laws break down under extreme conditions, like at the speed of light or the massive scale of the cosmos.
That makes a lot of sense.
Shifting paradigms mean our truths are getting more refined, more accurate, and more comprehensive. We're getting asymptotically closer to the reality of how the universe operates. We shouldn't throw our hands up in despair and declare truth dead just because our knowledge evolves and becomes more nuanced.
That is a crucial distinction. Refinement is not the same as refutation. But while the academic world is refining truth, the digital world is often actively undermining it.
Yes, it is.
Let's unpack a cultural phenomenon that Gardner references to explain how truth gets distorted today. It's a term famously coined by the comedian Stephen Colbert.
Truthiness.
Truthiness. It sounds like a joke, but it describes an incredibly dangerous modern epistemology. Truthiness is this tendency to believe that something is true simply because it feels right in your gut, rather than relying on facts, evidence, or logical consistency.
It bypasses the brain entirely.
It's what happens when a statement perfectly appeals to your underlying emotions, your fears, or your preconceived worldview, so you just accept it as truth without ever checking the data.
And the internet loves that.
Oh, in the digital age, algorithms are explicitly designed to feed us content that triggers truthiness, which is why misinformation spreads like wildfire.
It is a profound vulnerability in human psychology, and it leads to deeply entrenched, fundamentally differing cultural narratives coexisting within the exact same society.
We see that everywhere now.
Gardner points to a fascinating cultural data point to show how fragmented our reality has become regarding fundamental truths. He sets a poll conducted by the Barna Group.
Oh, I remember this from the text.
Right. The poll found that 60% of Americans believe that God created the universe in 6 literal days.
60%.
Yes. Now, regardless of where you personally fall on the spectrum of evolution versus creationism, looking at that statistic objectively is staggering.
It really is.
It shows us how incredibly divergent our basic frameworks for scientific and historical truth have become. We have millions of people functioning in a modern, technologically advanced society who hold a foundational narrative about the origins of reality that completely bypasses the disciplinary truths of modern biology and geology.
It's two totally different tracks.
It highlights that we are not just arguing about facts. We are often operating from entirely different epistemological universes.
And the digital landscape only amplifies that divergence. The internet is this bizarre double-edged sword when it comes to truth.
It really is.
Gardner shares the fascinating and somewhat tragic anecdote of Kavi Viswanathan to illustrate this. She was a brilliant, highly driven college student who secured a massive, highly publicized publishing deal for a young adult novel.
A huge success story, initially.
Right. It was a huge success story. But very shortly after the book was published, it was exposed that she had plagiarized multiple passages, almost word for word, from other popular authors.
Just lifted them straight out.
Her career was instantly ruined. The books were pulled from shelves. Now, this story perfectly captures the paradox we are living in.
The poison and the cure.
Exactly. On one hand, yes, the digital age makes deception, copying, and lying easier and more tempting than ever before in human history. The tools to plagiarize are literally at our fingertips.
Mutual C, Cretual V.
But at the exact same time, it provides the ultimate, unprecedented tools for crowdsourced fact-checking. It wasn't a solitary literary critic who caught her.
No, it was everyday readers on the internet.
Everyday readers using search engines to instantly cross-reference texts who uncovered the plagiarism. The digital world generates an incredibly thick fog of lies, but it also hands us the brightest flashlight ever invented to cut through that exact same fog.
Which brings us to the core, actionable takeaway for how we survive this. If the internet is simultaneously the poison and the cure, what is our role? How do we operate?
What's the strategy?
Gardner suggests that our pursuit of truth can no longer be passive. It must become increasingly metacognitive.
Metacognitive.
Metacognition is simply thinking about thinking. In this context, it means we have to think deeply about how we know what we claim to know. We cannot just passively consume statements from a screen and file them away as facts.
We have to do the work.
We have to actively evaluate the sources, the methods, the biases, and the evidence behind every single claim. We have to ask, is this disciplinary truth, or is this truthiness?
That's a great question to ask.
We may never reach one flawless, absolute, capital T truth that perfectly explains the entire universe forever. But through rigorous disciplines and metacognitive thinking, we are getting closer and closer to highly reliable, pragmatic truths that allow us to build a functioning society. Truth isn't dead. It just requires a lot more mental elbow grease from us now.
So, if you are listening to this, what does metacognition mean for your daily life? It means you have to actively appoint yourself as the editor-in-chief of your own brain.
I love that, editor-in-chief.
When you are scrolling through your feed and you read a headline that instantly makes your blood boil or perfectly validates a grudge you hold, you have to force yourself to stop.
Take a breath.
You have to ask, am I reacting to truth or am I reacting to truthiness? What is the source here? What is the evidence? That metacognitive pause, that brief moment of reflection before you share or before you internalize the anger, is literally your superpower in the digital age. It is how you defend your own mind.
That is an excellent summation of how we defend truth. But as we move forward in Gardner's framework, we encounter a virtue that requires an entirely different set of tools.
Let's talk about beauty.
Let us examine beauty and how we transition from being defenders of facts to curators of aesthetic experience. The first and most critical thing we must understand is that beauty operates on a fundamentally different axis than truth.
They aren't the same type of thing.
As we established, truth is a property of a statement. It can be proven or disproven. Beauty, however, is not a proposition. Beauty is about an experience.
An encounter.
It is a subjective encounter with an object, an event, a piece of art, or even a person. You cannot mathematically prove that a painting is beautiful the way you can prove an equation.
That distinction changes everything about how we approach it. Gardner points out that when we experience true beauty, we have a very specific, almost paradoxical reaction.
We want to get closer, but not too close.
Right. When we encounter something truly beautiful, we actually want to maintain our distance from it, but we also feel an intense compulsion to revisit it. Think about it. If you see an incredibly beautiful painting in a museum, you don't want to consume it.
You don't want to eat the canvas.
You don't want to eat the canvas or destroy it to possess it. You want to stand back, maintain that physical boundary, let the visual information wash over you, and then you want to come back and see it again tomorrow and the next day.
It creates a response.
It creates a psychological or even a measurable physiological response. A sweet shiver down your spine, a sudden intake of breath, or a rush of serotonin. It arrests our normal utilitarian way of moving through the world.
But defining what actually triggers that shiver today is incredibly contentious. Because once again, we face the postmodern critique.
They come for beauty too.
Postmodernists argue that beauty is nothing more than a localized cultural bias. They point out quite accurately that what was considered the pinnacle of human beauty in 18th century aristocratic France is vastly different from what is considered beautiful in 21st century Tokyo.
Or ancient Mayan culture.
Exactly. Furthermore, they point out that for the last century, much of modern art has actively, aggressively tried to distance itself from traditional, classical notions of beauty.
Like Marcel Duchamp.
Think of Marcel Duchamp putting a porcelain urinal in an art gallery. For a long time, the elite art world rewarded works that were intentionally ugly, shocking, or utterly mundane, deliberately defying the idea that art must be beautiful in a harmonious sense.
So you have the postmodernists saying beauty is just a totally arbitrary cultural illusion. But on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you have the biological or evolutionary argument.
The hardwired argument.
Right. Some evolutionary psychologists argue that beauty isn't an illusion at all. It's just hardwired primal biology. They argue, for instance, that we find symmetrical human faces beautiful strictly because symmetry is a biological indicator of good genetics, health, and parasite resistance.
Or the savanna hypothesis.
Yes, the savanna hypothesis to explain why we find lush green landscapes beautiful. They argue that our hominid ancestors who felt a positive aesthetic draw toward green landscapes were more likely to find water and food and thus survive. Therefore, when you look at a beautiful landscape painting, it's just an ancient survival instinct firing off in your modern brain.
Now, while there is undeniably some truth to those biological baselines, we are biological creatures. After all, Gardner aligns with the writer A.S. Byatt to argue that reducing all of human aesthetic experience to mere survival instincts is a massive oversimplification.
She calls it overreading.
Byatt calls it overreading. She brilliantly argues that while evolutionary biology might explain why a human being fundamentally prefers a pretty, colorful sunset over a dark, terrifying storm, biology absolutely cannot explain the granular nuances of high art.
It's too blunt.
Biology cannot explain why a highly educated person prefers one specific, incredibly complex poem by John Donne over another poem written by the exact same author. Biology cannot explain the deep, nuanced appreciation of a specific avant-garde jazz solo, or why the subtle, specific brushstrokes of an impressionist painting move us to tears.
It misses the details.
Biological explanations are simply too blunt an instrument to capture the profound depths, the cultural layers, and the individual idiosyncrasies of human aesthetic experience.
That makes perfect sense. Biology gives us the canvas, but culture and individual experience paint the picture. But that leaves us with a massive question. If beauty isn't just a totally arbitrary cultural illusion, and it isn't just a blunt biological survival instinct, what exactly is it? How do we define it today?
Gardner turns to the philosopher Nelson Goodman to navigate this. Goodman proposed that instead of looking for one strict, rigid definition of beauty like Henry Adams might have wanted, we should instead look for the symptoms of the aesthetic.
Like diagnosing a cold.
Just like a doctor doesn't need to see the actual virus to diagnose a cold, they just look for the symptoms, like a cough or a fever. We can look for specific symptoms to diagnose a beautiful experience.
So what are the symptoms?
Building on Goodman's foundation, Gardner proposes a modern triad 3 core flexible requirements for something to be considered beautiful today. First, it must be interesting. Second, it must have a memorable form. Third, it must invite revisiting, meaning it successfully triggers that psychological or physiological shiver we talked about earlier.
The addition of interestingness as the very first core requirement is a profound shift in aesthetic philosophy.
It really is.
Historically, classical beauty was almost entirely about harmony, perfect proportion, mathematical idealization, and serenity. But in the modern, hyperstimulated era, perfect harmony is often no longer enough to arrest our attention.
We need more.
Gardner illustrates this massive shift by pointing to the conceptual artist John Baldessari. Back in the 1970s, Baldessari famously created a piece of art that simply consisted of him writing the repeated sentence, "I will not make any more boring art," over and over again on a gallery wall like a punished schoolboy.
A manifesto for the modern age.
Exactly. Today, for something to be granted the status of beauty by a modern audience, it must fundamentally engage our intellectual curiosity. It must surprise us, challenge our expectations, or offer a genuinely novel perspective. If a piece of art or music is perfectly harmonious, perfectly executed, but utterly predictable and boring, modern audiences will simply walk past it. It will fail the test of beauty.
And this requirement for interestingness leads to a massive structural shift in how we actually experience and categorize beauty in our daily lives. For centuries, there was what Gardner wonderfully calls the Great Temple of Art.
The elite gatekeepers.
In this temple, beauty was a strict, top-down dictate. A very small, elite group of gatekeepers, professional critics, wealthy aristocratic patrons, and museum curators, told the masses what was objectively beautiful. You went to the Louvre or the Opera House, essentially to be instructed on what good taste
If
was.
you didn't get to decide.
If the gatekeeper said a painting was beautiful, you agreed, or you were deemed uncultured. But the digital age has taken a sledgehammer to the great temple of art. The digital landscape has completely fragmented that centralized authority.
You don't need a curator anymore.
Today, you don't need a curator to tell you what is beautiful. You can curate your own infinitely expansive digital museum on Pinterest. You can build your own auditory landscape through Spotify playlists. You can follow obscure artists directly on Instagram. The gatekeepers have lost their monopoly.
This is where we see a stark divergence between how we handle truth and how we handle beauty. In the realm of truth, as we discussed, fragmentation is highly dangerous. We desperately need to converge on shared disciplinary facts to function as a coherent society.
Yes, absolutely.
But in the realm of beauty, fragmentation is incredibly liberating. The democratization of beauty is arguably one of the most overwhelmingly positive, life-enhancing outcomes of the digital age. You are no longer bound by what a 19th century European critic deemed valuable or what a gallery owner decides is marketable.
Exactly. It is a complete paradigm shift for the individual. You, the listener, are now the ultimate, undisputed curator of your own beauty. Your portfolio of beautiful experiences is entirely unique to you.
It's totally personalized.
Your aesthetic portfolio might include classical Russian literature, alongside incredibly niche indie video game design intertwined with urban street art and set to a soundtrack of underground electronic music.
A custom blend.
And Gardner argues that we should fiercely embrace this fragmentation. We shouldn't waste time mourning the loss of a universal monolithic standard of beauty. Instead, we should take on the active, passionate responsibility of curating the things that genuinely give us that aesthetic shiver, that possess a memorable form, and that are so deeply interesting that they keep us coming back for more. We are all curators now.
It is a deeply empowering view of art and experience. But while the individualization of beauty is a triumph of the modern age, we must pivot sharply here, because the exact same individualization applied to our next virtue is a recipe for societal collapse.
A total disaster.
Let us delve into goodness, specifically how we function as neighbors and citizens. While beauty is about a subjective experience with an object, goodness focuses entirely on the objective quality of human relations. It is the framework for how we treat one another.
And Gardner makes a brilliant distinction here.
He does, an absolutely critical distinction that clarifies so much of modern moral confusion. He divides the massive concept of goodness into two distinct, separate spheres. The first sphere he calls the morality of the neighborhood. The second sphere he calls the ethics of roles.
I found this distinction to be the most illuminating part of the entire book, so let's really take our time and break these down. The morality of the neighborhood is exactly what it sounds like. It is about our direct, face-to-face interactions with other human beings.
The people right in front of us.
How do you treat your immediate family? How do you treat your friends? How do you interact with the person bringing up your groceries at the local store? This sphere of morality is deeply, inextricably rooted in our evolutionary history as primates who survived by living in small, interdependent tribal groups.
Our survival depended on it.
Because our survival depended on group cohesion, humans evolved a very keen, highly sensitive biological radar for detecting cheaters, for understanding the necessity of reciprocal altruism, and for maintaining basic fairness.
So it's very stable.
Because it has this deep biological root, the morality of the neighborhood, the basic rules of don't lie to your friend, don't steal from your neighbor, help someone who falls down in front of you, has remained remarkably stable across thousands of years and across almost all human cultures. The golden rule is essentially universal in neighborhood morality.
That foundational stability is comforting. However, the second sphere, the ethics of roles, operates on an entirely different level of complexity.
A completely different level.
This sphere refers to how we behave, not just as humans, but as professionals, workers, and citizens in a massive, abstract, complex society. What does it mean to be a good journalist, a good corporate accountant, or a good democratic citizen?
Our ancestors didn't have to worry about that.
Unlike neighborhood morality, the ethics of roles is not hardwired into our biology. Our hominid ancestors did not evolve instincts for navigating international trade law or journalistic integrity. The ethics of roles is highly complex, entirely dependent on cultural constructs, and right now it is changing incredibly rapidly due to the forces of globalization and digital media.
The rules are shifting beneath our feet faster than we can rewrite the manuals.
To illustrate just how confusing and unprecedented this has become, Gardner poses a brilliant hypothetical scenario. How would the great 18th century philosopher Immanuel Kant navigate Facebook?
I think about this thought experiment all the time now. Immanuel Kant is a giant of moral philosophy. He is the guy who came up with the categorical imperative.
The ultimate strict rule.
For those who might not remember Philosophy 101, Kant's big idea was essentially a rigid test for morality. Before you take an action, you have to ask yourself, would I be okay if literally everyone in the world acted this exact same way all the time?
What if everyone lied?
Right, if you want to lie to get out of trouble, you have to ask, what if everyone lied all the time? Well, trust would collapse, society would fail, therefore, lying is categorically immoral. It's a brilliant, strict, logically sound rule for an 18th century village where actions have clear physical consequences.
I put him online.
But imagine dropping Immanuel Kant with his categorical imperative in front of a modern laptop and asking him to navigate the digital world. He would be completely lost.
He would be paralyzed not because his intellect was lacking, but because the ethical scenarios of the digital age operate on a physical and social logic that is totally unprecedented. Take digital piracy, for example.
Perfect example.
If I steal an apple from a vendor in Kant's village, the vendor no longer has the apple. It is a clear deprivation of property. But if I illegally download a digital music file, the artist still has the original file.
The physical object hasn't been removed.
If Kant applies his imperative, what if everyone pirates music? The economic structure of the music industry collapses, but the file still exists, the music still plays. The physical logic Kant relied on breaks down.
And what about anonymity?
Furthermore, Kant wouldn't know how to ethically evaluate anonymous online interactions. How does the categorical imperative apply when you are interacting with avatars, bots, or anonymous trolls who say things behind a screen that they would never dream of saying face-to-face in the neighborhood?
It requires an entirely new rule book.
The ethics of roles in the 21st century requires a completely updated, vastly more sophisticated ethical rulebook than the one we used for the last 300 years.
And the fact that we haven't fully written that new rule book yet is having devastating real-world consequences. This brings us to a massive, incredibly sobering piece of data that Gardner presents.
The Good Work Project.
Gardner, along with a team of researchers, conducted a massive years-long initiative called the Good Work Project. They literally interviewed thousands of professionals across various fields, journalism, genetics, theater, business, to understand what it actually means to do good work in the modern age.
How did they define it?
They define good work as work that hits 3 criteria. It is excellent in technical quality, it is personally engaging to the worker, and it is socially responsible and ethical. But when the researchers focused their interviews specifically on young professionals who were just entering the highly competitive globalized workforce, the findings were deeply, deeply troubling.
The psychological weight of what those young professionals revealed is staggering. The researchers found that many of these brilliant, highly driven, well-educated young people felt that the modern, globalized, digitally accelerated landscape was so hyper-competitive, so cutthroat, that they genuinely believed they had to cut ethical corners just to survive.
Just to keep their heads above water.
They weren't sociopaths. They understood the traditional ethical rules of their professions, but they felt that playing by those rules in 2010 or 2020 would put them at a fatal disadvantage against competitors who are willing to lie, cheat, or exploit the digital gray areas.
The rationalization they use to justify this is the part that really haunts me. When pressed on their unethical behavior, these young professionals utilized a specific psychological defense mechanism. They planned to be ethical later.
The ethical later.
They basically told the researchers, look, I know what I'm doing right now isn't perfectly ethical, but once I've made my millions, once I've secured my power, my position, and my safety in this chaotic market, then I will be a good person.
Then I'll play by the rules.
Then I will give to charity, mentor the youth, and play by the rules. But right now, in the trenches of the entry-level global market, I have to be ruthless just to survive. It is a profound moral compartmentalization.
And that mindset is a direct, tragic consequence of the blurring of the ethics of roles. When the rules of professional conduct are in flux, and when success seems completely divorced from moral behavior, human beings inevitably default to survival mode.
It's human nature.
And this ethical confusion in the professional sphere is heavily compounded by a broader cultural danger arising from postmodern tolerance. Postmodernism, at its best, teaches us to respect other cultures, to explicitly decenter our own historical biases, and to avoid judging others harshly based on our own localized standards.
Okay, it's a good thing.
On the surface, that sounds like a universally positive evolution of human empathy, but Gardner issues a stark warning. The noble desire to not judge other cultures or individual choices can very easily, almost imperceptibly, morph into complete moral paralysis.
Yes, it is the dark side of who am I to judge? If we take postmodern relativistic tolerance to the absolute extreme, we completely lose the vocabulary and the philosophical grounding to call out genuinely bad destructive behavior.
We can't say anything is wrong.
If a multinational corporation is exploiting workers in a developing nation, or if a politician is blatantly lying to the public to stoke violence, and our cultural response is simply, well, that's just their narrative, that's their cultural norm, who am I to say it's objectively wrong? Then society literally falls apart.
Tolerance cannot mean the acceptance of exploitation.
We cannot afford that kind of sophisticated moral paralysis. We have to be able to look at certain actions and say, definitively, with the full weight of shared human values, that is bad.
To counteract this paralysis, Gardner proposes a monumental task for the 21st century. We must actively construct a new, truly universal ethical framework. The text explicitly points out that the Western Enlightenment, for all its undeniable brilliance regarding individual rights and the scientific method, is simply too narrow a foundation to serve as the sole moral compass for a fully globalized, interconnected world.
It's just one piece of the puzzle.
Right. The Enlightenment philosophers were, historically speaking, a relatively homogeneous group of Western European men writing for a specific cultural context. To build an ethical framework that truly applies to a planet of 8 billion interconnected people, Gardner argues we must draw on the profound, tested wisdom found across the entire globe.
A truly global synthesis.
We must synthesize the ethical concepts of justice and community from Islam, the deep focus on mindfulness and the reduction of suffering from Buddhism, the intricate understanding of social harmony and relational duty from Confucianism, the rigorous logical ethics of secular humanism, and the profound ecological stewardship found in indigenous traditions.
It's about finding the overlaps.
By looking objectively at Gardner's proposal, we see a vision not of erasing differences, but of finding the overlapping ethical imperatives, like the universal rejection of cruelty or the shared responsibility for the vulnerable, to create a global matrix of ethics.
So, if we synthesize all of this, what does it mean for how we live? It means we have to recognize a fundamental asymmetry between our virtues. As we discussed in the last segment, the democratization and individualization of beauty is a wonderful, liberating thing. You can absolutely have your own completely unique aesthetic portfolio.
But goodness.
But you cannot individualize goodness. The democratization of goodness is a recipe for anarchy. A society simply cannot survive if every single person invents their own personal, subjective ethical rulebook regarding how to treat others or how to act in their profession.
We need shared standards.
If we don't have shared, universally agreed upon ethical standards for our roles as citizens and professionals, the social contract tears to shreds. We can have a million different definitions of what makes a painting beautiful, but we must converge on a shared definition of what makes an action good.
Precisely. Which leads us to the most vital, practical question of this entire deep dive. How do we actually learn, internalize, and teach these complex, shared virtues in a world that is constantly trying to distract us? Let us examine the final piece of the puzzle, cultivating virtues across a lifespan.
Gardner draws heavily on his background in developmental psychology here.
Right, and he asserts something incredibly encouraging. We are not born as blank amoral slates. In fact, young children are natural essentialists.
If you have ever spent any extended time with a 4-year-old, you know exactly what essentialist means in practice.
Oh, absolutely.
Very young children, naturally, almost biologically, seek absolute order and absolute truth. They want the world to be neatly divided into black and white, good guys and bad guys. They recognize the concepts of fair versus unfair incredibly early on, long before they can articulate the philosophy behind it.
They just feel it.
If you have 2 children and you give one child 2 cookies and the other child only 1 cookie, the child with 1 cookie does not need a degree in ethical philosophy to scream, "That's not fair."
They know it's a violation.
They have a deep essentialist craving for goodness and truth to align perfectly. They believe rules are absolute, given from on high, and must be followed.
It is a beautiful, necessary stage of development. But as any parent or teacher also knows, that rigid essentialist phase simply does not last. As children grow into adolescence, their brains undergo massive cognitive shifts, and they enter a natural, biologically and socially driven postmodern phase.
The teenage rebellion.
Teenagers begin to develop the cognitive capacity to question authority. They become hyper-aware of hypocrisy in the adult world. They see that adults preach one set of rules but often live by another. They realize that the absolute truths their parents taught them might be flawed, subjective, or culturally specific to their hometown.
And that leads to relativism.
Consequently, they naturally challenge traditional norms and very often embrace a deeply relativistic view of the world. It is the classic teenage shrug of, whatever, it's all just made up anyway, nothing really matters.
We have all lived through that. The angst-ridden teenage years where everyone is a hypocrite and all rules feel like arbitrary control mechanisms. Now, Gardner points out that this phase is actually crucial. It's a necessary step in cognitive development to separate from parents and form an independent identity.
So it's not a bad thing inherently.
The danger isn't entering the postmodern phase. The danger is getting stuck there. If a teenager never moves past that cynical, relativistic phase, they calcify into a paralyzed, cynical adult who contributes nothing to the shared good.
So how do we get them through it?
Gardner argues that adults, whether that means parents, teachers, coaches, or mentors, must provide strong, consistent, visible, ethical models. We cannot just preach Kantian ethics to teenagers. We have to explicitly show them what goodness looks like in action. We have to model integrity in our own professional and civic lives, demonstrating that while the rules are complex, they still matter immensely.
Furthermore, in the realm of beauty, adults play an equally critical, though often overlooked, role. If we leave adolescence entirely to the mercies of peer-driven, algorithmically generated pop culture, which is designed purely for engagement and consumption, their aesthetic sense may remain completely superficial.
We have to step in.
We must actively intervene and expose them to deep-crafted beauty. We need to introduce them to complex art that requires patience, challenging literature that expands their empathy, and the profound, slow nuances of the natural world.
Give them the tools.
By actively guiding them through the history of how human beings have grappled with beauty, we give them the necessary tools and vocabulary to develop their own rigorous aesthetic portfolio, allowing them to move beyond whatever fleeting trend happens to dominating their social media feeds today.
And the most important takeaway from Gardner's lifespan approach is that this process of cultivation doesn't magically stop when you turn 18 or get a college degree. The ultimate lesson here is the absolute non-negotiable necessity of lifelong learning.
You can't just coast.
The world we live in changes with the speed of a digital refresh rate. What constituted being a good digital citizen or a responsible professional 10 years ago is totally outdated now. Sitting back in your armchair and assuming you know it all because you learned it in the 1990s is no longer a viable option for survival.
If you stop learning, you lose your grip on the virtues.
True virtue maintaining an accurate, metacognitive picture of truth, curating a meaningful, deeply personal sense of beauty, and practicing rigorous, updated goodness in your professional life requires active, continuous, relentless mental engagement. You have to keep updating your philosophical software every single day.
It is a profound, lifelong responsibility. And this brings us to our final synthesis of Gardner's monumental work. Throughout this deep dive, we have charted a very deliberate course between two unsustainable extremes.
The two books we started with.
On one hand, we have the rigid, ancient certainty of Henry Adams. Adams yearned for a medieval world where truth, beauty, and goodness were absolute, unified, and dictated from on high by a single, unquestionable authority.
But we can't go back.
We cannot go back to that cathedral. The modern world has irrevocably changed, and arguably that medieval unity was never as perfect or as just as Adams imagined it from his 1904 vantage point.
And on the other hand, we have the cynical, postmodern chaos of David Shields. A world where everything is copy-pasted, where objective truth is mocked as an illusion, and where morality is so totally relative that we lose the ability to defend human dignity.
That leads to collapse.
We absolutely cannot survive in that world either. It leads directly to intellectual nihilism and moral collapse.
Therefore, Gardner asks us to boldly chart a middle path. We must acknowledge and integrate the genuine insights of postmodernism, accepting that our knowledge is imperfect, that our historical narratives are biased, and that our cultures are incredibly diverse.
And embrace the digital media.
And we must harness the incredible democratizing power of digital media without surrendering our minds to the chaos of either force. We achieve this middle path by continuously and metacognitively pursuing rigorous truth, utilizing our best disciplinary methods.
We achieve it by actively curating beauty.
We achieve it by actively, passionately curating our own profound experiences of personal beauty, independent of the old gatekeepers. And we achieve it by collaborating across cultures and traditions to build a shared global goodness that holds us all accountable to the future.
This has been an incredible, truly expansive journey through Gardner's mind and the landscape of our modern crisis. But before we sign off, we want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought.
Something to really chew on as you go about the rest of your day, as you pick up your phone or open your laptop.
I challenge you to take a hard, rigorously honest look at your digital diet today. Examine the media you consume, the news feeds you scroll through, the podcasts you listen to. Are the sources you are dedicating your precious time to actively helping you build a rigorous, metacognitive understanding of the truth?
Or are they feeding you truthiness?
Or are they simply feeding you comfortable, emotionally satisfying, algorithmically generated truthiness that confirms your existing biases? Furthermore, when it comes to the aesthetics of your life, are you passively scrolling through endless, forgettable, hyper-processed images? Or are you actively seeking out and curating moments, whether in art, in nature, or in conversation, that give you that true, transcendent aesthetic shiver?
It's all about the daily choices.
The survival of these three ancient virtues doesn't happen in the abstract halls of philosophy. It happens in the minute-by-minute choices you make on your screens and in your interactions today.
Don't forget to follow us and subscribe to stay updated on our latest episodes and never miss a step in this odyssey of thought. Until next time, keep questioning.